Started recording. Here we go. I don't know if that was, John, were you want to keep going with, was that part of this discussion or?
I was saying it probably wasn't worthy of recording, but the only idea that I have ruited a little bit is, what if the ringers took a holiday and told the powers that be at the church that we're not going to ring on pick a Sunday, the third Sunday of the month or something, and that they ought to get a group that starts by themselves and teaches themselves and figures out how to do it, but none of them feels intimidated because none of them is ringing with somebody who's got any experience, and they just get enough instruction initially to try to keep from killing themselves. I know, Eve, this must make your skin crawl, but but just somehow make it easy for a group to form their own cohesion among themselves so that they don't feel like they're holding anyone else back, and see if they can learn to ring, and then they get the third Sunday of the month or something.
John, that seems an interesting idea. We're still trying to get ringing back at all in Rochester, and we're succeeding. We're gradually building back. We had 5 ringers last night, and we tried a little Bob doubles and Bob minor.
Could I throw in a comment on John's comment?
Yeah.
I think that I think that it's an interesting idea. What I think a slightly different but similar version of that is just having specifically a learner's practice, because I found that when I was learning and I was in a tower with a lot of experts, it was actually sometimes incredibly useful to learn how to ring where you have 7 steady ringers and 1 not steady ringer, and having the steady ringers around you was actually incredibly helpful to a certain extent while learning some methods. So what I think you're kind of getting at is building an environment where young new ringers feel like they're the center of attention and that the session is for them. But I think that I think that necessarily having a practice where it is specifically just them and not other people is maybe not necessarily the way to go. I think having a practice that is specifically for learners, but where experienced ringers are still encouraged to attend, I think would be a slightly different experience of that would still get the same aims that you're looking for.
So I can speak to that a little bit, in that in Boston in the last year, we've started a specific night for learners that has gone over very well. And I can talk more on that in a bit, but I do want to highlight one thing from John's observations that I completely agree with, in that having a cohort or multiple people learning at about the same time is very useful. That I think it can be tough if you're the only person in a tower learning with a bunch of experienced people, feeling like, oh, I'm making all of these mistakes. And even just having one other learner at about the same time, that you see, oh, it's natural to missing the sally, or things like that are every learner does. But if you're standing with 6 or 7 experienced ringers, you feel like you're very behind, learning very slow. And so I think that's why it can help having a couple of people learning at the same time, with that increases how likely each of them are to stay if they see somebody else going through the same process.
But okay, I missed the beginning of John's thing, but my concern is all of this assumes we have people. My question is,
yes,
how do we get people through the door in the first place, so that we then actually have, 2 people or 10 people or whatever that we can work with?
I'll try to be quick.
That's where we seem to have a problem anyhow.
I'll try to be quick to say that was part of the idea of saying we're going to take a strike and we're not going to ring on a certain week, and just have someone, whether it's the clergy or the parish life person, but somebody go, oh, we've got to, it's not fake. It's like, we want to get a group of people to start and learn to do this because the experienced regular band is just not going to ring on this Sunday. And so let's get a group who will do it. And it engages it. I don't know if this would work at all, but thought it might be that we could get the leadership of the church who are not ringers involved in trying to find a group of people in their 20s and 30s or whatever ages who are willing to take it on, who are willing to try to do it.
But they haven't been willing to yet.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know.
And at least in our case, no, they wouldn't notice. I mean, we could say, we're not going to ring the first Sunday of the month, and they'd say, oh, okay. And I think that may be true of a lot of towers.
And so we actually,
I think they might say, oh, good.
Well, there is that.
So we actually did have this issue last month where there was a question of, were we going to ring for Palm Sunday, where traditionally we had not, and the cathedral for some reason thought we were. And we said, we're going to follow our tradition. And the cathedral's response was, okay.
Well, except, I mean, well, we follow.
But we've been
It
having.
wasn't our tradition, it was their tradition that they imposed, 10 years ago to change things, and then they forgot.
And we're having this issue right now where we're not able to get people for wedding ringing often. And so we have not been able to ring for several requests for weddings. And the cathedral has not been jumping up and down yet or expressing concern. So I'm not sure saying, oh, we won't be able to do it, if it's going to motivate them to do anything.
Well, yeah, my idea was really to do it in cahoots with the clergy. I mean, we wouldn't go, hey guys, we're just so tired of not having any help, we're going to stop. But to say, let's try this. Let's try not ringing on a certain week and try to get the leadership of the church to say, we're recruiting a group of folks to learn to do this because we need people to ring on that Sunday. It may be a crazy idea.
Well, if your clergy would agree and your ringers agree to be there and have handling practice as a service ringing.
Yeah.
We're lucky with our clergy. They're really supportive of us. One good thing that they did was they organized a young adult Catholic group within the cathedral. And we actually got 3 ringers from that group. And because they came to the I think the group meeting was similar to our practice time. Maybe they went to the meeting and then they came to ringing. But with COVID, I think that stopped now. And two of those ringers have gone to different parishes, and the other one is an RCMP officer now in Saskatchewan, which is wonderful. It's good to see people get on really well and then move away. But and I think our clergy actually are concerned, but we didn't ring for Palm Sunday. We didn't ring for Christmas Eve or New Year's, actually, I think last year. So we've struggled, and now we're down. We're down to 5 ringers, and one of them, she's 91. Talk about getting old. And then Peter's 80 now, so I'm on the way. So it's tricky, and we're on the really crappy side of town. Vancouver, you're right on the edge of the not so good area in Vancouver. So trying to get young people to our tower is difficult.
So you need your area gentrified.
Not with high rises, no. I think it's post-COVID and the drug situation here. It seems to have come to a head, but it's just not the place to attract young people to come down and ring. But with the young Catholic group, they were a group, as you were saying, and they came together. So yeah. We're down to 5 ringers now that come. Sometimes on practice night, we only have 3. So, the limit to number of 3 bell methods you can ring. But if we stop ringing, then the neighbors will think that we don't exist. And then they start complaining when we start again. So we feel that we have to make some kind of noise on a Tuesday night. just to let people know that we're still there.
And
So can I toss out a question to Tom, building off something Eve said of people succeeding and moving on elsewhere? When people are leaving, for instance, Chicago, who are ringers, or anyone else
Sorry.
wants to discuss, where are they going? Are they going to places with towers, and do they keep ringing? Or do we lose them as ringers at that point? Or are they, for one reason or another? For anyone who is relatively new from the academic side.
Well, Michael's a shining star, actually, but he's not necessarily typical.
we've in
I
Boston.
don't know. I think if speaking for myself, long ago, but it's it's part of my decision of where I was going to move was, well, are there bells anywhere near? And if
I
somebody
jokingly refer to that as my definition of a livable city.
right. So, so if somebody's, as I say, foaming at the mouth about ringing, they're going to make decisions like that. So, I don't know if there's a great way to answer that question. It depends, of course, right?
And I can
Yeah.
speak a little bit from experience in that. I mean, once people are interested in ringing, there are kind of two forces. One that is keeping people in ringing, which is, at least in terms of like people I know and my friends, like a lot of my friends like living in Northeast cities that are popular and have a lot of people in them. And those cities often tend to be where the bell towers are. The downside is, particularly in academia, you don't always get a choice as to where you want to go. And this was exemplified when my thesis advisor left Harvard and took a position at WashU. And then I just kind of had to go along with him. And I didn't have a huge amount of choice in the matter. Probably similarly, when I, fingers crossed, will be applying for faculty positions, I'm not sure how much choice I'm going to have in the matter as to, where precisely I end up. So I think that, having control, a lot of people would love to minutely control over where they could get a job, but that is not always a possibility.
But I guess my question is more, even before that control question, when people are going elsewhere, they're moving to the next phase of their life. And do they happen to be going to places with towers? And if so, do we lose them as ringers at that point?
Yeah. So
I left Chicago. I moved to Ithaca, New York, which did not have a bell tower. And from there, I moved to Rochester, New York, which did not have a bell tower. We now have bells in Rochester. So ringing did not lose me, but it was difficult keeping in touch, and I had to travel a lot. And I'll have more to say about that a little later.
Yeah. So in Boston, we have two groups of people, and I think they're people like Michael that come to Boston from other towers and then continue ringing, being part of the community. And then we've also had other ringers that have come from Kalamazoo or Kent that are in school or working in Boston that haven't ended up staying. And I think part of it depends on how busy they are when making that transition. And so I think there are some people that will factor in their movements. Does the city I'm moving to have a bell tower? And I think those are people likely to stay sort of regardless of where they go, are more likely to stay in touch. I think for the people that end up not continuing, I think some of the barriers to entry are how easily accessible are the towers and the times where there's ringing. I think if there's a lot on their plate and the towers are hard to get to, or they don't know of an easy way to get there, that can be a challenge. Similarly, if the ringing times, if there are limited or irregular ringing times, it can be harder for them to make it. And so I think there are some elements of that are out of our control, that the churches will only let us ring at certain periods. But I think trying to make practices accessible, whether that's offering rides or seeing if different days are more accessible to people, especially when there's a band of just 5 ringers, if switching to a different day would mean that you could get practices of 7, then those might help break down some of the barriers to people that move but then can't continue ringing based on their schedules.
Because
Yeah.
my observation is we're both concerned. If we're concerned about having enough ringers, it's 1, getting new people in, and it's 2, trying to minimize attrition. And the question is, are there simple things that we can help do to minimize attrition, recognizing that people do have other lives outside of ringing?
We have 2 students in Rochester who are continuing to ring. They learned elsewhere. They're continuing to ring here, and we keep them by offering them lots of hospitality and rides because they can't afford a car. The public transportation takes too long.
Yeah, the number of like ringing weekends or things that I needed a ride to was all of them because I didn't have a car in Boston. And I was very lucky that, there were many ringers in Boston who did and would very freely offer me a ride to and from places, like rides, parking. And I think beyond hospitality, just having more social events, even outside of just regular ringing, like an easy way, I think, to rope people in and make sure they never leave is just to not impress upon them, but to have them understand that this is a lifelong community of friends that they're going to make. And if they see it less as like, oh, these are piano lessons, I can start or stop them as I need, and more of this is a community of friends that I want to be a part of, I'd say that would be also a matter for attrition.
And so if I can just jump in, this also, I think, in part relates to something that John Mabe started with, noticing he was the 2nd youngest ringer. The question is, does a 20-year-old show up feeling, aha, I'm going to be making a group of lifelong friends when everyone else is, shall we say, of more mature years?
Which gets back to the idea of trying to recruit a group to take it on together. Another problem in our church, we've got no shortage of people, but it's just not a cool thing. And I think if people understood how cool it is, then we wouldn't have so much trouble getting people to start.
I was joking with my wife that we need someone to make TikTok videos that go viral.
I mean, sometimes it's just as easy as getting one person. I mean, John, maybe you can attest to this. Like, there was one friend of Austin's at Williams who pulled in, like, it was just a successive chain of like everyone who was in this person's orbit, they pulled in.
Yeah, I will say that, yeah, the strongest pipeline that we've had over the last 5 years in Boston have been friends who hear of another friend that does bell ringing and are intrigued, and then come to the tower and are equally excited. And so I definitely think if you can start the pipeline of having just a couple of people, that it definitely propels things forward. And I know the big question is how to get started with that. But I will say that as far as retention and getting new people, that I think word of mouth and reaching out to friends has definitely been our strongest pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is just like, there's something very exciting about being around people who are very enthusiastic at something and also a bit good at it. And that necessarily isn't an age thing. Like, if you have youthful enthusiasm for a thing and also are just a general, fun person to be around during the social hour afterwards, like, age is, I think, less of a barrier than you think. It's just a matter of like, can you create the forum in which you have a bunch of people who are just excited about what they do, sharing what they like.
Mm-hmm.
We always go for coffee afterwards, after practice and after mass ringing, and sometimes we're at coffee for 2 hours. I mean, it's and I do believe that at least one person who comes to ring with us probably wouldn't come if we didn't do that. They live on their own, and I think that's part of the big attraction for them. I think
we
that's,
went out for Mexican food.
yeah.
Uh, I have another idea, which I want to bring up before the discussion gets too far along. With the passing of the pandemic, and let's hope that we have at least a serious reduction in the incidence over the summer, I think we need to take the opportunity offered of having ringing and having visiting other towers while we have at sort of before things start over again with a new variant. And I hope it won't happen, but here's what I think would bring together interested and excited people in a number of nearby towers on a given weekend. I brought this up with a few people before. My idea is to have someone in an area where there are 2 or 3 towers take the reins and design a weekend for ringing at specifically those towers. It's basically a sort of little area meeting, but it would involve inviting people from outside to fly in and take part. We used to have more of this in the early days of regional ringing, and I think reviving it would be a very good move. The point would be to get enough people together in a given tower that there's that there's an actual schedule for beginners, intermediates, and advanced ringing, and to have people from the vicinity see what's going on, see what ringing involves, see that people are really kind of happy and excited to be doing it. And this involves the ringers themselves also. And if there are towers quite nearby, you could have one in the morning and one in the afternoon, or one per day, and try to, the local person, try to help arrange for relatively affordable and good accommodations and meals together, and get a local restaurant involved in doing a large reservation and that kind of thing. There's a certain amount of administrative work involved, but it's not as difficult as running a whole ringing tour. And so I think if we have a few people of administrative bent who are interested in doing this, I think it could be quite beneficial to the North American Guild and to ringing in North America.
I would say I think it's a cool idea. My one comment on that would be the monetary cost of this is, I think, going to be very high activation energy for new ringers. Or
We don't have no winners.
well, there's that too. And I'm just saying, like, as a retention tool, I think that's really, really cool. As a recruitment tool, I don't think that would be something. I mean, I think we're on the right track. I mean, my kind of opinion on this is just run more open houses in the institution. So, like, for example, I have a friend of mine who did a little bit of work for the National Cathedral, and he went on a tour of the bell tower while there was no ringers there and nobody in it. And he didn't really get a sense for what ringing was. And then I went and visited them on the way to the wedding, and we stopped off in the tower beforehand so I could get in a poll before we went to this wedding. And they came with me. And when they actually saw people there in the space, he was like, "Oh, now I understand what this is." Like, just the idea of watching people do it and being around people while they were doing it was enough to kind of turn the light bulb on to be like, I understand what this is now.
Yeah, I guess in theory, Mike, this sounds like kind of have several taster sessions, which sounds wonderful if one can get, the church to support it. And particularly for a ground floor ring like Raleigh, sounds really great. It gets more complicated in some other places. One of the issues I see is staffing it. I mean, we have plenty of ringers, but they're not going to staff it. Either a combination of they won't staff it because they have their lives or don't care, or they'd be happy to staff it, but are not comfortable with some of the, so we have this weird, but in theory, we could try, try it and maybe, you only need 2 or 3 people who can let them have a taste and stuff. But if you could somehow generate, so you get street traffic in essence, you want to get street traffic kind of, but how we go about doing that, I don't know.
And we
Or
used to in Washington have the tower climbs as part of the Flower Mart, which unfortunately Flower Mart happened this year, but no tower climb. But that was an opportunity to be able to give a lot of people an introduction to actually see ringing.
But not, yeah, they could see it, they couldn't try it.
Right,
Is
they
the,
couldn't
is
try
the
it.
difference. And getting
Right.
something that they can try something, not necessarily really the full ringing.
And
But
if I
even
can-
just, sorry, go ahead.
Why don't you go first, then I want
Okay.
to look back to what Chris was saying for a moment.
So what I was going to say is just even seeing it and
Mhm.
to try it at a later date, I think is like, that's the shots on goal you need, right? Like if you can get like maybe 10, 15 people up to allow maybe from a church service, like at the end of the service, either an inducement where they announce this, or maybe have a couple people or whatever who can just climb the tower, have one designated person who pushes them back from the ropes, and then just lets them watch ringing and says, if you think this is cool, come back at practice.
Well, and the other thing that we've had no success so far, although various people say, oh yeah, that shouldn't be hard. If you can get camera so that at the end of the service, or whenever you ring, people downstairs can see it. So they start to build up some knowledge. But whether that works, I don't know, because we haven't had it.
Yeah.
We have a camera in our when we come through the front door, the camera's up on the wall on the side, and the congregation do love to see it. They love to see us ringing there, but I don't think it really brings anybody in.
Yeah.
But, we're still at the stage where we wouldn't really be comfortable just having lots of people up in our tower, or even people, I've met people before they come up to ring with us, because we have a 90-year-old and an 80-year-old, and they're very much at risk. And so I think that's really changed a lot.
Yeah, I mean, the way
in better times that would be, but right now I think it's tricky.
Yeah.
We,
I mean, the way
just-
I think about it is very much as shots on goal. Like the people who were going to like change ringing are going to like change ringing if they see it and talk to the people. And so the way I've always kind of thought about it is like, how many shots on goal can we get where like you cycle through the right number of people, and the people always going to stay are going to stay.
We getting back to what, I mean, briefly, Quilla mentioned the ground floor at Raleigh, and some of you have never been there and seen it, but it's literally across the street from the state capitol, 10 paces from the sidewalk, and you can look in the door and see the ringing. And on a pretty day, we sometimes have 2 or 3 couples or groups drop by and look in the tower and say, what are you doing? This is really cool. And invariably, they're from someplace else in the country that doesn't have bells. It's never anybody who goes to our church. And so part of my concern is that people in our church understand that the bells are rung, and they go in, they see it, and they don't think it's cool, and they don't want to do it. And so, the shots on goal thing is very discouraging, because they've had the shots on goal and they have not scored. So I don't know what to do about that. How to make it sexy, I don't know.
We have a ground floor ring, and I can attest that it doesn't work magic. One problem is that we don't at this point have a lot of parishioners, because a lot of them had to leave during COVID, and they're still afraid to come back. New York State and Monroe County still being a bit high in caseload for COVID.
So getting back to what something that Chris had said of the getting people, just, I admit that it's different being single in 20s and being married in 50s and having a non-ringing spouse and announcing, oh gee, I want to go away for a weekend, have fun without me, and you deal with all of the childcare. It doesn't exactly fly very well. And so that sort of thing, limits it, but also related to the just what people are doing with other towers and sort of the visit, encouraging visiting other towers. I am probably by Princess Anne an average of once a month at this point, and will be for the indefinite future. I have let them know I will be in the area. Given rates, it has not been, COVID rates, it has not been worthwhile going there, but it's still just this question of, I would have expected at some point someone might have said, hey, what's your schedule for being down near us? Here's our practice schedule. Do you think you might be able to swing by when you're driving past at one point? And that hasn't happened. And so I imagine we may be having the same thing, that there may be people coming through Washington who may be able to make a slight detour, but may not, if they're being asked, may not make a special effort. Of course, Princess Anne ringing, who knows what state that's really in at this point, since they tend to be fairly quiet.
I have a couple notes that I'm just going to throw them all out for a second. One is the thing about social activities. I had an email from Charleston about what they're doing. I was amazed. They say they meet for dinner after practice every Tuesday, and they have a catered dinner every Tuesday. All right, rock on. So, and that's, they're able to do that, and it works great because it gives them time together. And but so we'll all find our own ways to do more social stuff, and so that's something we can work on more here. I'll just make a statement. I always I think a lot about racial diversity, and so I'll raise that again. We're not a terribly racially diverse group, and I'll just say that, so maybe it'll get, somehow. So and clearly, if we could plug into one or two people, and they bring their friends, it's certainly that's why we're not racially diverse. I think because it largely comes through, well, who's your friend? Okay, have a friend come, and that tends to be not a way to develop racial diversity. So that's something we can hopefully stay aware of and keep working on. I had email from Tim Barnes, and he had a couple things that they are thinking about. So I'll just say that, and it might lead to a bit of discussion. So one thing is our recruiting should be more targeted at groups that have a track record of doing well at chain ringing. For example, STEM subject graduates in their 20s have proved to be a very good demographic. I agree with that, and it still makes me a little uneasy to limit it. Yeah, okay, so second thing, a series of YouTube videos explaining and demonstrating chain ringing would be a better way to attract this group than written printed material. Perhaps TikTok even better. And then he says we should try and improve the learning experience for new ringers. Otherwise, they won't progress quickly enough to become hooked. Key to this, in my opinion, is better ringing simulators, so you can give a student dedicated practice time without the manpower challenge of needing an experienced band around them. And then he says, I'm in the process of developing some new simulation software, a more advanced version of Able that's targeted at teaching, which, if I can finish it, I hope might help with this. So,
I mean, Tom, I can say from your and mine personal experience that having one teacher in a simulator is thumbs up.
Yeah, that's about the simulator. Yeah, absolutely. I've said over and over that there just wouldn't be practice in Chicago if there wasn't a simulator.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Tom taught me in a.
Oh, sorry.
But I was just saying, for those of you who don't know, Tom taught me and a small group of other people, largely on a simulator, and by just kind of rotating us each, like in and out one by one, as we were learning.
Yeah. It's not ideal, but it's sure better than not having the bells ring. And yeah, it's you can do a lot of effective stuff with a simulator. I'll mention Michael too, because I'm so thrilled with, he would he would come to practice. He'd say, okay, I can just stay for a half an hour or something. And Tom, can you set up the simulator so I can practice plane pop? Bam, we do it. He'd be off on his own while I was working with other people. You can do all kinds of stuff with the simulator. Oh, and another thing I was going to mention is about visiting other towers. I'm recently retired. I can't say that forever, but I'm still within a year of retiring in the past. I am going to go to Quebec for a couple weeks in late August, early September. And that's something I am hoping and planning to do like once a year, go somewhere and just stay for a while and see if I can enrich the situation. And so I encourage others to think about that too.
Our door's open.
All right. I at the AGM in Boston, I talked to Margo Wakeham. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. So I kind of was floating this idea, and she said, "Yeah." And so you're on my list.
Okay. Oh, so is it the goal of this session to propose anything, or is this more of a bellyache session?
Well, I'm not going to say a bellyache.
I feel like that's all I've done.
It's away from keeping each other's spirits up. But yeah, I don't know. I don't personally. I don't view it as okay. Here's our action items and let's go. But more of a let's talk about it. But if there are action items or ideas that people want to move on or team up with other people on, that's a wonderful idea. I don't know.
Well, let me. Everybody's got their own little, their own tower. I mean, we're all concerned for the future of ringing in the guild, but it all starts at home. And so I'm worried about ringing in Raleigh, and I really am trying to gauge whether the parish cares if the ringing continues or not. That's sort of behind my idea of just saying, well, again, soliciting the support of the clergy to do this, but say, guys, y'all need to recruit a group to just learn to ring. And we'll help them if they want help, if they need help, and of course they will ultimately. But I don't know if I could convince the clergy to actually do that. And I'm wondering if anybody has any ideas about a way that you can, convince them that would be a good thing to do. Any thoughts on that?
So, I mean, I can only speak to my own experience growing up in church, but when I was in church growing up, there were like things that like the kids did. There was a youth choir, there was a youth tune ringing handbell choir for a bit until we were kind of the last crew and that kind of died out. And then there was like the church youth group, and like there are already, I assume, like institutions for young people and for people of all ages within the church that are both oriented or musically oriented or something like that. And so I don't know if the pitch to the clergy would be, we need you to recruit a group of bell ringers. I think the pitch to the clergy is, how can we better integrate bell ringing into the existing social and musical institutions of the church?
Okay, thank you.
We have a little ceremony for the choir as recognized for their choir ministry, for the bell ringers on a different day, recognized for their bell ministry. And generally these happen once a week in the season, and each group that has a lay ministry within the activities of the church is recognized for its work up front in the nave, and just a little prayer said for the continuing good works and benefit of the group. So that is one way of actually bringing the bell ringers a little more to the attention of the people in the church, to recognize it as an actual ministry, like many other ministries within the typically Episcopal Church.
Thanks, Chris.
I have a question about some of these towers in that we've talked about reaching out and getting a couple of new ringers. But I don't know the makeup of the existing band. And if, let's say in Raleigh or Vancouver, there were, 2 new ringers or say members of the young adult group at the church that came, are there ringers there that are comfortable teaching and helping them progress? Or is that an additional step that we need to consider how to have people there to support these new ringers that would come in?
We'd probably get by with teaching, with our own resources for the most part. And then we rely a lot on Washington for lateral support. Quilla has been down many times to ring with us.
Well, that's good to hear, just because I don't have a great sense at some of these tower what support there would be for if we achieve the first goal of getting people to come in. Is there the support to have these new people continue learning?
I would be interested in going to a place that had ringers that wanted to learn and staying for a while, getting a band started. But they'd have to be able to spend the time while I'm there, like not just 2 nights a week. It would have to be a more intensive thing.
I should step in and make sure, I know Charlie and Bob and Kira. I hate to put you on the spot, but I hate to not give you the opportunity to say anything if you would like to. Charlie, you're on my top left here. Anything you'd like to share about?
Well, we're kind of frozen right now because we're not even having practices currently at the church. So we're still in a transition phase of getting the church back up and running in a more normal fashion. But our band is aging, and we really need to draw people, and almost any age would be younger if you're under 60. So it wouldn't be hard to fit that criteria, but we really need some younger folks into the band to carry it forward, because we have a bunch of people in 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s in some cases who are mainstays within the band. And long term, that's going to be a challenge.
I texted Kira a little while ago. I think only her phone is here. I'm not sure she's present.
Right. So yeah, fair enough. Okay, there you go. Hey, Kira.
Yeah, maybe she is. Maybe she's just ignoring my text.
I have not looked because I am driving, which is also why I'm actually driving to Quillis. But so I have a couple of thoughts. Number one, I don't necessarily think that, if you have a tower where everyone is, of a certain generation, and somebody who's young or who's in their 20s comes in and is, 25 years younger than the next ringer is too much of a barrier. I mean, knowing our group, we're all such a fun group that I myself, have found situations where that's the case. So I would say that is probably not as big of a barrier as some people might guess. I have had somebody mentioned TikTok earlier, and I've had that. I've seriously considered, maybe I, have my sister make TikToks or something like that about the subject, because I think if more people knew about it, and if more people knew about it, they would, come to be engaged. Because I'm not, but I think at what point do people get hooked? Do people look at it and find it intriguing, and so they try it and then they're hooked? Or do people, because I don't think anybody gets hooked upon hearing it. Maybe some people do, but I would say I don't, well, actually, I don't know. people are trying it and physically ringing the bell that they go, oh, I want to do this for quite some time, and then it becomes a lifetime hobby. I'll probably have
Drive carefully.
I think the age thing is quite important. When I learned how to ring, I learned with about 6 people my own age, we were 14 and 15. And I must admit, at that age, the social part of it was much more important to me than the ringing part of it. It was lots of fun, and I don't know whether I would have actually kept on had I not had that. And they were my friends throughout until I went up to London. We rang every night, and it is really important to have a peer group, I think. How you get that, I don't know. So I mean, we have UBC close to us, and we've tried to get UBC students, but they come and they go. Like Alison, I think you've got her in Boston or close to Boston now. But she was wonderful, and she really tried hard to bring other ringers into the fold. And another one we had from UBC, she's now doing her doctorate in Germany, in France. So I find university students are wonderful when they come, but then they all leave. Yeah. So.
Bob, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, just a couple of things that we are in that category of people where right now we have 9 active ringers who can ring competently. Of those, 4 of us are in our mid-80s, so this business of aging is certainly part of our concern here. For some reason or other, we're fairly fortunate right now. We're working with 4 learners. I'm going to say out of the group that is actively ringing now, there are 4 actual active church members, and 2 of them are, outgoing, really friendly people, and they make pitches at coffee hours and all their various interactions. Out of that, we've actually picked up 2 long-term members who are now learning, who very recently started learning. And one of our pitches has sort of been, hey, we need ringers. We really need ringers. And we try to pitch it's really not all that difficult. I'm one of those people who thinks you should never say that ringing is a mathematical thing, because if the physical skills of ringing are really not mathematical at all, and sometimes math intimidates people. So I try to be very careful about using that particular term. We work every Saturday morning right now. We've got 2 people who have been relatively long-time church members who have, just because of the pitch of these other people talking to them on a regular, hey, we need people. They've come out and joined us. They're both going to be very decent ringers if they'll stick with it. A few little odds and ends that we need to try to get their coordination down a little better and things like that. I've recently had 2 youngsters who somehow or other became exposed to change ringing. One of them when he was 10 years old, and he really wanted to get into change ringing. So right now we're working with he and his dad, and they're coming along. He was sort of at the low end of being strong enough to ring bells, so we had to obviously start working on the lighter end of the bells. We did have him ring our tenor today and show that, yeah, even though you're not as big as Quilla, you can still ring this tenor here. It's not all that trouble with once you get the bell up and let it do most of the work. So they're coming along very nicely. The one other youngster who picked it up and became aware of it through online stuff ends up living about 2 hours away, and that just did not end up being reasonable in terms of him participating on a regular basis. So far we've been pretty lucky, and but I think our main emphasis is going to continue to be pitching to people through coffee hours and that sort of thing. And at some point here, we will probably go into some of these. We have a ground floor ring with very easy access, not quite as easy access as Raleigh has to their tower, but not much more challenging. And we, in previous years, going back before COVID times, had periodically would have a Saturday afternoon open house that we would publicize and people would come by. And so we've tried to bring in other people. So far we've been pretty fortunate, but obviously we would like more. Eve will know that when we started in Honolulu, we had a very, very avid group of learners, and Chris mentioned, people being willing to work 7 days a week, and that was the way people were out there in the early days. I'm not going to say, I won't acknowledge that our ringers are avid ringers, but they're very faithful ringers. I would like to see them being a little bit more progressive in terms of wanting to get further into different things, more complicated methods than that. They have more talent than they're giving themselves credit for mostly. So anyway, those are my comments.
I see that we're at the top of the hour, so I am going to thank you all for coming and stop the recording.